Many of you travel in Asia, some of you live in Asia, and some of you Asia is new. So I'd like to tell you a little bit today about Chinese calligraphy, just a little beginning of what calligraphy means. And we're sitting here at this table full of things, and right away you look at these beautiful things and you wonder, why does she have a rock on that table? In fact, one of the most beautiful things about calligraphy is all the things that go with the actual painting. It's a little bit like, I like to think of it as a ski trip, and you've got what's called après-ski, and all the wonderful things that surround the activity of skiing. Well, there's a lot of beautiful objects that surround the activity of doing Chinese calligraphy. And calligraphy, done at its highest level, is done by literati scholars, or scholars that are poets and writers and painters, and they love to have the most beautiful things around them. And 4 of the things that they have around them are called the 4 treasures. So let's look at the 4 treasures first. One of the treasures you've got right in front of you, and that's a brush. And don't touch them. In fact, one of the things that you learn when you're working with Chinese learning styles is that you don't do anything until you're told to. You sit very nicely and politely with your hands in your lap until the master, which is today me, tells you exactly what you're going to do. So number 1 is your brush. The second thing that you treasure is your silk or your paper. The third is the ink stick, and the 4th is the ink stone. You think of ink, and most of the time we think of inks coming in a bottle like this. And it usually smells a little bit bad, so just be wary of Chinese ink. The cheaper, the better it smells. But traditionally, the most beautiful ink comes in the form of a stick, a solid stick. And this stick would be ground on, if you owned a beautiful, beautiful antique inkstone, something like this. And the inkstone should have a place for a bit of water, or you'd have another little water container. You also could have a beautiful ceramic water container, and then you would slowly grind for many, many hours till you have enough ink. Or there's a legend that says the very finest ink is ground by virgins. So you have a little assistant there, a beautiful lady grinding you fresh ink. And each stroke will be painted with this beautiful fresh ground ink, which I've used, and it's so tedious, but it is like velvet. It is quite different from the stuff you get here. All right, so what I thought we'd do today is a very famous character that everyone learns as one of their first characters, and it uses the basic strokes. And in front of you, rather than beautiful silk today, you've got what I like to call magic paper. And it requires only water to paint, so you don't get messy. It's very clean, and you can practice over and over with this magic paper. We're going to do the character for eternity, or young. And in that character, every stroke that you actually need to learn exists. So it's a way of sort of learning your typing strokes. We used to have a sentence we typed. I don't think anybody's used it in 100 years. Now is the time for all good men to come to the end of the party. Remember that sentence? And if you could type that, you could type anything. It used every finger. All right, so this character, eternity, young, uses every brush stroke that you'll need to eventually write the beautiful characters. Now, I know I've got at least a couple people here that know some Chinese characters. Have you ever tried to do them with ink and the brush?
Yeah, actually yesterday we did.
Oh, that's fabulous. All right, so you can show me how you've learned it. All right, so I wanted to
already a loser.
You've got your brushes in front of you, so pick up your brush. And I've given you a little bit of water. We're using water only on your paper today. I just want to show you what's interesting about this brush. This brush is different from any Western brush. Get it good and wet. And if this was a brand new brush, if you just bought it, Kristen, what would it be like if you just bought a brand new brush? Do they give you new brushes?
Yeah, it would be really hard.
Hard as rock, like that.
Yeah.
All right, so don't make the mistake and embarrass yourself by trying to paint with it hard as a rock, right? You have to soften it, put it in water, rub it a little bit gently. Don't let it soak, because the glue in these brushes will fall apart. So you just want to moisten it and give it a little bit of twist and let it soften. But what you want to notice when you're using a traditional Chinese or Japanese brush is that it should go to one really sharp point. You see, you should be able to paint theoretically. If you've got a really beautiful brush, you could paint with one hair. Seriously, one hair. And the beauty of this brush is you could paint with one hair, even if the brush is humongous, even if you've got a brush this size. Theoretically, you should be able to make that go into one hair. But you can also give a lot of weight to the center of the brush so that the stroke will have thick and thin quality. And that's how you measure the strength of your calligraphy, how well you handle the brush, and how well the thick and thin creates the variety and the rhythm and the repetition. So that's what you're after. Eventually, you want control of that brush. And brush control is the key to making beautiful, beautiful calligraphy. And every stroke requires a certain way of using that brush. So what we're going to do is the very first stroke that you learn to do eternity is literally just a blob, almost a blob. So I'm going to do it in ink, but you're going to do it in water. So put your brushes down, and I'll show you, and I'm certainly not a master, but I've done a little bit of eternity over the years. And I've got a beautiful eternity in frames here that, you can see it so well. They do it very quickly here, so it makes this first stroke, which is like this. All right, so I want you to take your brushes and wet them. And we're going to do stroke number 1 in eternity, which is simply a downstroke. And it's important that it go down, because if you went up, it would be a different word, literally. Every stroke has to be made the right direction, it has to be made the right strength, and it has to have a curve or a straight depending on the meaning of the word. So you're literally going to make a blob. And of course, if you were doing something really gorgeous, you might, as you got to be a master, you might make a blob that splashed beautifully, like this is done by one of my calligraphy professors. And this blob, I mean, he literally smashed that brush down, and it made a wonderful splash. And that's part of the expressiveness. You're not allowed to be expressive yet. Right? When you're a master, you can become expressive.
I think I've done a great blob there.
All right. All right, so take a
I'm
few.
happy with it.
Right, and you'll notice this paper you're using is great fun, because it will show up as if you're using ink when you're only using water. So I suggest that when you have kids, those of you who have nieces, nephews, grandchildren, take a piece of this every restaurant you go to. Stick a brush in your purse, and you can keep your kids happy for hours with this magic paper. All right, so make a whole row of little blobs. Just a quick downstroke and lift. While you're working with a brush, theoretically, you should have a perpendicular line. Your brush should be perpendicular to the plane of the paper. And your hand, if you're really doing it well, will be also parallel to the plane. And you'll be working like this.
So what happens when you're left-handed?
What happens where I have a friend that knows what happens when you're left-handed.
They tell you you have to use your right hand.
They harass you to death. Right.
Really?
They beat it up. Yeah.
And if
What?
you were me, you quit the class.
Right.
At the age of 57, you say, I'm
I don't
sorry.
either. I don't know. People,
Somebody else want to take over here.
Tim, more experience. What would they do? Would a left-handed person survive at all in calligraphy? What do you think?
I'm not too sure about that, honestly speaking.
Okay.
I've never seen a lot of left-handed.
Exactly. It's not,
calligraphy.
it's not that flexible. You can try, for sure, not to worry. All right, so number 1, and really, quite truthfully, you might be doing number 1 for several years before they let you move on.
Just
I
this
mean,
blob.
Yes. The idea is that you need to perfect each step, right? But we won't be that mean. Right? The next part for eternity is going to be a line that goes with a flat end and goes up. And if you would practice this with a master, he would make you do a very long list of these. And you do the first character that has almost a kind of a dog bone look to it. And you would learn to do your lines that way. But the character eternity has a very short upstroke. And if you made it down, it would be a different word. So the stroke needs to use the side of the brush to carry it forward and up to your right. Below left to top right.